Hey everyone, Mr. DVB here. In today's video, I'm going to be ranking all live-action Spider-Man villains from worst to best in a tier list. I don't do these kind of videos very often. I prefer to do my own, style of ranking and whatnot, but I have a lot of content planned right now over the next few days that I'd like to get up before the end of the year, and so I thought to make my job a bit easier, I would just do a tier list instead. Still gets my point across. I can still give you guys my thoughts on all these characters and whatnot, so I'll be doing this instead of a regular ranking. As for the characters, we have 12 of them here that I'll be talking about. I'll be talking about their performance, so how the actor is in the role, the story for these characters, their motivation and whatnot, the design of them, their outfit, if the effects are good and whatnot, if they're comic book accurate, those kind of things, and then their action sequences, so how they perform in the movie from a spectacle standpoint and whatnot. So those are the different aspects I'll be discussing when I'm looking at these characters and ultimately deciding where they place in my ranking. So first up is New Goblin, aka Harry Osborne, who was the villain, or one of the villains, in Spider-Man 3. He was definitely the most set-up villain of that film by far, because there was the prior two films which were exploring Harry Osborne. In the first movie, he loses his father to Spider-Man, and so he holds a grudge against Spider-Man. He wants him dead. In the second film, he finds out that Spider-Man is his best friend, Peter Parker, and so now he is going after his best friend. In Spider-Man 3, he finally takes the Goblin serum, and he becomes, the New Goblin. Now, New Goblin, in my opinion, is an unfortunately underwhelming villain, because, the movie just has too much going on. He doesn't get all the focus that he deserves, and also, I just don't love the direction they go with the story. I do love, the end of his arc, where he goes to, help Peter Parker in the end, and he helps him, take on Venom and Sandman, and sacrifices himself ultimately in a very emotional death scene. But I think just the whole, memory loss subplot that the movie had, where he hits his head at the start of the film, and then he just forgets, everything that happened, is pretty stupid. And then he ends up just taking, or fighting Peter emotionally by having MJ break up with him. So they don't really use the character in a way I would have liked. I think those elements could have worked if he was the only villain in the movie, and then they just saved the other threats for Spider-Man 4, but unfortunately, Harry Osborn, Green Goblin, or New Goblin, was kind of a disappointment. I think that from a performance standpoint, James Franco's great in the role. He'll always be like Harry Osborn to me. And I like him, when he is New Goblin. He's not like Green Goblin, Willem Dafoe, where there's kind of two personalities. He's the same person ultimately, just stronger and whatnot. But I like the performance, but I just think the story for his character is pretty weak. Design-wise, I think the outfit's pretty cool in my opinion. I like the look of him, and I think that the action scenes with him are fantastic. I absolutely love the opening fight scene, in the city at nighttime where he's on his glider. I think that's great, and I think the brawl in the penthouse is pretty cool as well. So he's between okay and great for me because, he's okay as a villain, but he's great as Harry Osborn. So I'm putting him in the good tier. I think he's right in the middle as far as, just balancing those two things out. He's a great character, but he's an okay villain is kind of how I'm looking at it. So I'm going to put him in the good tier because I still ultimately liked him in the movie. I just wish they focus on him more. Next up is Rhino in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, who is a pretty big joke, played by Paul Giamatti. From a performance standpoint, he is very over-the-top and goofy, which, as just a very small side threat, I think it works. Obviously, if he was a main villain in the movie, it would not have worked very well, but he's just kind of there. I don't really hold a huge grudge against the character like some people do. I see some people consider him a huge issue in the film. He's not really a villain in the movie. He is, but he's not a main villain. He's just there, so I don't really care that much in the end. Story-wise, he's just a guy trying to pull a heist, and then he wants to defeat Spider-Man at the end, so there's nothing to him there. From a design standpoint, I like the mech suit. I think it looks pretty cool. I think it makes sense if they're going for a more grounded, realistic version, that he would have some kind of mechanized suit, as opposed to a guy in a skin-tight Rhino uniform. From an action scene standpoint, they don't really do anything with him because the movie cuts out right before we get to see anything happen. So I'm going to put him on the bad tier. He's obviously not a good character at all. But I also don't despise him. He's just there, so it doesn't really matter in the end. Next up is Electro from The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and from Spider-Man No Way Home. So this is the tale of two halves because, performance-wise, I think Jamie Foxx is a great actor. I just don't like the writing for the character in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. He's way too goofy. Just the whole, idea of him where he's, this nerdy, geeky guy who's a big fan of the hero, and they don't become friends, so now he like hates him. It's similar to like Jim Carrey's Riddler, Cheetah recently, and like Wonder Woman 84. It's not like an original concept, and it's pretty goofy in my opinion. It doesn't work very well, and so while his performance is fine, it just doesn't really. I don't really like him in the movie because they give him bad writing. Like he's just not a well written character. In No Way Home, I actually liked the character quite a bit more. I thought the performance was better, and he wasn't as goofy or anything, but he's still just kind of an odd character in that sense. Story-wise, I already touched on, just how he's kind of dumb with his motivations and whatnot. He literally hates Spider-Man because he doesn't want to be his friend, or, I guess betrays him or whatever. It doesn't really work out. Design-wise, again, there's two different designs, so you kind of have to take that into account. I think his TASM 2 look is decent. I like the blue electricity. I think it can lead to some really visually stunning sequences, but sometimes his face just looked kind of stupid in my opinion. Like in the third act in particular, the CGI on him does not look very good in my opinion. He can look kind of dumb at times. Whereas in No Way Home, I actually really like his design. I like the more grounded look where he's kind of in human form, and he has like this weird suit on, and he uses yellow electricity. He gets like the star thing over his face, which is obviously a reference to the comics. So I prefer the No Way Home look, 'cause that's kind of like the one that I'll take into account when I'm ranking him. And then action scene wise, I think he's got some really great action sequences in TASM 2. In particular, I love the one in the power grid. That's a really visually spectacular sequence. In No Way Home, he doesn't really have as many memorable moments from an action standpoint, but overall, I think he is an okay villain. He's definitely better than Rhino. His motivations are kind of stupid, but he's got a pretty cool look, and I think his action sequences are great. Next up is Vulture, played by Michael Keaton in Spider-Man Homecoming. I think he works really, really well as like a first-time threat, as because Homecoming is like a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man movie. It's the most grounded Spider-Man movie by far, and so I think having a villain who is ultimately just trying to like steal some weapons that he can sell so he can make money for his family, it's a pretty low-key grounded storyline that I actually like. So he's got good motivations already, because he even says to Peter, like once he finds out who Peter is, and once Peter is dating his daughter and whatnot, he says to him, he's like, you can date my daughter, like make sure she has a good time, just don't get in the way of my business, or else I will kill you. Like my family comes first, and I really like that. So I think he's an intimidating villain who is well written. Unfortunately, he doesn't get to be in the suit that much, and so because of that, there's not really many action sequences with him, which was a bit of a disappointment for me. But I do think the performance from Michael Keaton's great. I think the story for the character is really good. The design I like. Obviously, it makes sense that he has a helmet on in this movie because he wants to protect his identity, so I'm cool that they did that over, him just having his face out the entire time. The weakest aspect for him is just the action sequences. But I still think overall he's just really well written, and he's really intimidating. So he's going to go all the way up on the great tier for me. Next up is Lizard in The Amazing Spider-Man and in Spider-Man No Way Home, played by Rhys Ifans, if I'm pronouncing that right. Lizard is kind of the opposite of Michael Keaton's Vulture, where I don't think he works that well as a first-time Spider-Man villain, because performance-wise, I don't really have much to say. I think that Rhys Ifans is fine as Dr. Kirk Connors. I think as Lizard, he's basically just doing voice work, and Lizard's a character who, in my opinion, shouldn't even really talk much, because that's kind of weird having this, CGI lizard guy talking. And that was something that was odd for me in No Way Home, was that he talked way more in that film than he did in The Amazing Spider-Man, and it just felt kind of weird. I do like his design in Amazing Spider-Man a bit more. They made him look a little bit more scaly, and they changed his eyes a bit, and I thought he looked kind of cool. But ultimately, he's still kind of like the same character. His story, he wants to just turn everybody into lizards, which is a pretty weak plot. He's not very well written, in my opinion. And then there's his, his design. I think it's okay. I think the CGI isn't the greatest in either film. He's not that bad looking in No Way Home, but in TASM, he's kind of iffy sometimes with his face. Obviously, they didn't go for, the whole lab coat look, and I am fine with that. They didn't have to, go for the comic look, in my opinion. So I think he's alright design-wise. I think from an action scene standpoint, he's decent. I like the final fight on Oscorp, or I think it's on Oscorp, in The Amazing Spider-Man. I think that was a decent scene. And the sewer fight and the high school fight. So yeah, overall, I think he's kind of between these two. I'm gonna put him on okay there, on the okay tier though, because in the end, I think that they're, like, you know, they at least gave us, like, an interesting villain, or not necessarily an interesting villain, but at least they gave us a villain who we hadn't seen before, even if he wasn't executed, you know, the greatest. Next up, Venom from Spider-Man 3, played by Topher Grace. So usually this is considered to be one of the weaker live-action Spider-Man villains, and I can understand why. A lot of people do not like Topher Grace as Eddie Brock. I actually like him in the role, and I think he does a good job. Obviously, he doesn't play, like, the bulky version of Eddie Brock that we're normally used to in, like, the animated series and whatnot, but I do think he still gives a good performance as Eddie Brock. It's kind of like this slimy, you know, reporter slash photographer who cheats at his job and, like, you know, fakes his way to the top. So I actually like him in that sense. Story-wise, you know, say what you will, his motivations at least make sense, unlike the villains in Amazing Spider-Man 2, right? Like, Peter Parker, you know, calls him out for the fraud that he is, gets him fired. In the newspaper, it's like, you know, they retract the photos that they put out, and they publicly list that, you know, like, he lied about those photos, so nobody's gonna hire him now. And then Peter takes away his girlfriend, so he has all the right reasons to hate Peter Parker, and then when he finds out that he's Spider-Man, he wants him dead. So he actually has, like, reasonable motivations, and I can completely understand why he is the way he is. Design-wise, probably in the minority here. I actually really like the look of Venom in Spider-Man 3, I'll be honest. I've always liked the look. It's not the most comic book accurate because he's not, like, huge and bulky, but I like him in the movie. I think he looks cool. I think for, like, the movie he fit. So I actually like the design of him, but I hate the voice. The voice sucks. I mean, like, he doesn't even really, like, have his face covered with the Venom symbiote much, but when he does, he has his regular voice, and it's just so annoying. I do not know why they didn't alter it at all. So yeah. And then action scene-wise, I mean, he's alright in the third act. I do like the fight with him, but he's not really a huge part of that final act. Well, I mean, he is, but they don't really do much with him from an action standpoint. He gets taken down pretty quickly. So I'm going to put him in the okay tier. I know a lot of people would have him in the bad tier, but I think he, you know, I think there's a good performance behind the role. I think the story for the character is good, but the design and action sequences are more of a letdown. And he's just not focused on that much, obviously. I mean, if he was the main villain in the movie and there was way more to him, he'd be better. But I do think for, like, as rushed of a role as he was, his motivations make sense. Next up is Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 2. I love this guy in the role so much. I love it because he's, like, a sympathetic villain to a degree. He's very, very well written. The performance from Alfred Molina is fantastic. I think he's great in the role. He just does such a good job portraying, like, this smart scientist who is taken over by these, you know, these arms, and just what a great role. I mean, I like his kind of, like, cocky attitude he has at times when he's talking to, like, Harry Osborne and stuff. The story for the character is fantastic, right? Like, he had this science project he's been working on for so long. It's been, like, his life's work, and then these arms, they take over his mind, and he wants to continue that project and finish it off and whatnot. But then, you know, at the end of the day, once he, like, realizes what he's doing, and he takes control over those arms, and he sacrifices himself for the greater good, saying that, you know, intelligence is, you know, it's to be used for the good of mankind. And I just love that about his character. He's so great in the movie. He is easily going on fantastic here. I just love Alfred Molina in that role, and seeing him again in No Way Home was just awesome. I mean, it's so great to have him back, and I'm glad that they treated his character properly, like he was the same character. Like, once he realizes, like, once they fix the thing with him in No Way Home, he's basically a good guy in the movie. I mean, he defeats Electro, and he helps him out in the end. So I really like how they wrote him, and I like that they kept him as, like, kind of a good guy in the end. Design-wise, love the look. I have no complaints. I mean, the arms look great for 2004. Like, the CGI on them is great. The practical effects are great. He looks awesome in No Way Home. So visually, great character. And then action sequences, I mean, he's phenomenal. The train fight, so damn good. So easily on fantastic tier. Next up, Green Goblin himself, Norman Osborn, played by Willem Dafoe. Oh man, I mean, he's just so damn awesome in the role. I mean, he'll always be one of my favorite comic book villains ever. Willem Dafoe is just such a meme. I mean, so many memorable, hilarious lines in Spider-Man 2002 that I just quote all of the time, especially a lot as of late. So, you know, performance-wise, Willem Dafoe, incredible in the movie. He was, like, born for this role. He's literally perfect. Story-wise, he's great, you know, like, it's simplistic. He's just the scientist who got fired from his job and stuff. He was the head of this big company. He takes the serum. It kind of creates this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type effect where he's got like an evil side to him all of a sudden, his like darker side, and that takes over him and it makes him do all these bad things and he's trying to fight it. And they even, they go even further into that into No Way Home, which I really liked. I loved the dynamic with him in No Way Home and some of his scenes. Design-wise, I love the suit, to be honest. I know some people have their issues with it, but I've always loved his look. Just the helmet and everything, it's so great. I love the voice, it's so awesome. The glider and everything, all the sound effects with this character. He destroys his helmet like pretty much immediately in No Way Home. I was hoping they would have a few more scenes with him wearing his OG suit, but I do like his like kind of alternate suit where he has like the purple hood and it looks a bit more like the comics, I guess. He has the goggles and stuff. And yeah, so overall, great character. Loved him in No Way Home. He was definitely like the best villain in No Way Home for sure. And his action scenes are really good. I find that the original Spider-Man, the action scenes are a bit dated, but I do like the final brawl. Just like how brutal it is, how much Peter's suit gets like ripped to shreds and stuff, and just like all those punches and stuff and the sound effects. And in No Way Home, I love the fights with him and Peter. When they fight in like the building where they're like slamming each other into the floor and stuff, that's great. His fight scene at the end of the movie where he's taking on Peter while they're on like Captain America's shield, like the Statue of Liberty sized one. Oh, that was also awesome. Like so many great moments with him. So he's going on fantastic tier. Next up, Mysterio, played by Jake Gyllenhaal in Spider-Man Far From Home. Man, Jake Gyllenhaal is one of my favorite modern actors, and when I found out that he would be playing this character, I got so excited, because that's just, like, such a great casting choice, and I love him in the movie. It's a very, like, over-the-top character in the movie, the way they portray him, but Jake Gyllenhaal sells it. Like, he just sells this kind of goofy, over-the-top character, and I really like his performance in the movie. So, does a great job there. I like how, for the first half of the movie, he's trying to pretend he's this person from another universe. I love his conversations with Peter, like, never apologize for being the smartest person in the room, stuff like that. Really like him in the movie. And then he just goes batshit crazy in the second half. Story-wise, he's this ex-Stark employee who created the binary augmented retroframing thingy, which got renamed Barf. Who gets fired from his job, and so he kind of has, like, this personal vendetta against Tony Stark. And so when he finds out that, like, the Edith glasses, which is like, this thing that controls these very powerful weapons, is being handed to Peter Parker of all people, he's pretty pissed off about that. And so he creates Mysterio, like this fake superhero who's going to take on these fake enemies and trick the world into thinking he's the greatest hero of all time. So I actually like the story behind him. I know some people complain about the over-reliance on like the Stark-related things, like, oh, he's a Stark villain, so is Vulture, but I still like the writing for his character. I still think he's good. Design-wise, this is probably my favorite design out of any of these villains. I think they nailed the outfit. I'm so glad they kept like the comic book look with like the fishbowl head and stuff. He looks awesome. Like that suit is 10 out of 10 phenomenal. Love him. I don't love the movie, but I do love him as a villain. I think he's great. I think his design is awesome. Like I said, I already just mentioned that. Really cool design. And his action scenes are great as well. Obviously he isn't like somebody who's actually really doing the action that often. A lot of it is just like, him kind of behind the scenes with these illusions going on, but the illusion scene in the hallway is just phenomenal, and I count that as like an action scene. That's just like one of the coolest parts of any Spider-Man movie, so he's going all the way up on the great tier for me. Really like him in that movie a lot. Next up is Dane DeHaan as Green Goblin. I really don't like this character. Performance-wise, I do not like him as Harry Osborn. I think he's just way too boring sounding and not really into the role much. And then when he becomes Green Goblin, he's so over the top with like his laugh and the way he talks, where he's like, Peter, when you said you wouldn't help me, you meant, or when he said, whatever his line was. So, overacts like crazy in my opinion. His motivations are terrible. Like, he's pissed because, at the start of the movie, like, he has this disease which he wants to cure. He thinks that the spider blood could help it, so, Peter Parker as Spider-Man tells him, I'm not going to help you, it could make you worse. Which is exactly what happens. It makes him worse, and so he wants revenge. Why exactly? His motivations make no sense. He's a really stupid character in the movie. Action scenes, he only has the one, and I think it's alright. It's pretty short, but, it leads to the death of Gwen, so I'll give him that much. But otherwise, yeah, he's not a good character. He's really bad, so he's going on bad tier, which is unfortunate, but he's not good. He's very bad. And he looks like Beavis from Beavis and Butthead. Like, design-wise, he's terrible. The suit's alright, but the face area and the hair, yeah, not really what they... I don't like it. It's bad. Next up, Sandman, played by Thomas Hayden Church, appears in both Spider-Man 3 and Spider-Man No Way Home. Sandman's one of my favorite Spider-Man villains of all time. Like in the comics and animated stuff. I just think the idea behind him, his power, is so cool. Like, I love the idea of him. And I really like him in Spider-Man 3. I think performance-wise, Thomas Hayden Church is great in the role. You know, I just think he does a good job with the character. I think the story of Sandman's really, like, you know, emotional and sympathetic. Again, like, he is a sympathetic villain just like Doc Ock, in the sense where, you know, with his character, he's got this daughter who is sick, and he wants to, like, you know, like, I don't know if she has cancer or not, probably, but she's sick, and he wants to, you know, he wants her to be better, so he tries to get money for her. And to do that, you know, he robs banks and stuff. Like, he has to become a criminal to save his daughter, and Spider-Man gets in the way. So he has the proper motivations. You know, the beautiful Danny Elfman score that or it's not even Danny Elfman, sorry, whoever, don't remember who did the score for Spider-Man 3, but it's not actually Danny Elfman. But, great score, though. Like, I love the music, with this character. I forgot to talk about the music of all these villains, but a lot of the scores are great. So it's like, he's got, like, that whole sympathetic aspect down. It's just, unfortunately, he's not focused on that much. You know, he's kind of pushed to the side. It's like the exact same thing where it's like, if he was, like, if Spider-Man 3 was just New Goblin, and then Spider-Man 4 was Sandman and Venom, then I think he'd be great. It's just, unfortunately, you know, he's just kind of pushed to the side, which sucks. Because I do really like the writing for his character, and I actually like the whole, like, Uncle Ben idea where he was responsible for Uncle Ben's death. Yeah, it's kind of like retconning, like, you know, the original Spider-Man, but I do like the direction it goes in, and it adds to that theme of forgiveness. So I really like how he's not really, like, a bad person in the end, right? He just made bad decisions, as he says. And I really like that, like, whole emotional part of his story. So I want to put him on great, but just unfortunately due to, like, the lack of screen time and stuff, he's gonna go on good tier for me. But he's a villain who easily could have made it to great tier. I think his design it's obviously fantastic. I mean, it's literally just the comic design come to life. It looks awesome. And I think his action scenes are really good. I love it's a very short scene, but I like the fight on the truck where, like, I just love that shot of, like, Peter punching him in the stomach, and then his hand gets stuck, and then he's, like, turns his hand into a giant hammer. That's such a cool visual. The sewer site's great, sewer fight, and then the final fight, where he's the giant sand monster. In No Way Home, I think all of the shots of him as, like, a human are just reused from Spider-Man 3. I think they literally just took those shots and put them in the movie. And I wasn't, like, a huge fan of how, like, for most of that movie he was just walking around as a sand creature. It was kind of weird in my opinion, but Thomas Hayden Church is really good in the role. Anyways, so I like him a lot. And then last and almost least is Shocker from Spider-Man Homecoming, played by, I think, I don't remember his name. It's like Bokeem Woodburn or something like that. Yeah, Shocker, I mean, I wish that this character was handled differently. I think, like, he's fine being, like, a side villain. Like, if he's just as a villain who's just there, kind of like similar to Rhino, I think he's fine. You know, performance-wise, there's nothing to say about him for me. It's not that the actor does a bad job, he's just not really given a role that has much to it. Story-wise, again, he's just kind of like a second-hand man helping out Vulture, so nothing really there. Action-wise, again, not much. I kind of like the, like, short little sequence they have with him fighting Peter outside of the school, where, like, you know, he punches him into, like, the bus, but not enough action for me to really say he's memorable. And then design-wise, lame as hell. I mean, like, really lame. There were some, like, leaked photos of, like, him actually wearing, like, a comic book accurate outfit, like here, which I think would have been really cool. The mask isn't, like, great, but I honestly think that, like, you know, if he looked like this in the movie, that would have been pretty cool. You know, like, having, like, a secondary villain who looked like that. You could have him in some more action scenes. I would have liked it, but unfortunately, he's just a very underused villain by the end of the movie who doesn't really amount to much. So I'm putting him on the bad tier, and now I'm going to actually go through all these guys and rank them. So I think the worst of the worst, I mean, I would say Rhino probably is. I'd probably go in this order. Like, even though, like, Dane DeHaan is terrible as Green Goblin, he like still has, you know, more of a story and more of a focus than these other two guys do. Like they're just there ultimately, so I would say he's at least more memorable than these two are. Of these guys, I would probably say Lizard's the worst. I'd probably go in that order. After No Way Home, I'd say I think that I would put Venom below Electro. If we were just going off of like TASM 2, though, I would probably have Venom above Electro, but I think that, you know, some of the... I kind of like the redemption arc, because he kind of has like a redemption. Not really, but like, you know, he's not really like a bad guy anymore at the end of No Way Home, which I really liked, by the way. I forgot to talk about that in my spoiler talk, but I really like how all the villains were kind of fixed by the end, and they're back to being like good people. That was really great. Are these two? Ooh, that's tough. I think I'm honestly going to put Sandman above Goblin. I mean, Harry as a character I like more, but villain-wise, if we're talking, I think that Sandman's more interesting. These two, I'd put them right where they are, and then swap those two, because Goblin is Goblin. He's great. So that's my ranking for all the villains. In first place, we have Green Goblin. Second place, Doc Ock, followed in third place by Vulture. Fourth place, Mysterio. Fifth place, Sandman. Sixth place, New Goblin. 7th, Electro. 8th, Venom. 9th, Lizard. 10th, Green Goblin from Spider-Man 3, or sorry, from Amazing Spider-Man 2. 11th place, Shocker, and then 12th place, we have Rhino. I actually think the other version of Shocker is more interesting in that movie. The guy who gets killed off by Vulture by accident. I actually liked him more, honestly, in the role. He just kind of had more of a personality. He was like a bit more cocky and untrustworthy, and I liked that. Whereas this guy, he just didn't really say anything. He's kind of just there. But yeah, that is my ranking for all of the Spider-Man villains from worst to best. So let me know what your thoughts are down below on these characters and what your ranking would be. And I'll see you guys next time. I will also be ranking all of the Spider-Man live-action suits. That'll probably be the next one that I put out. But until then, see you guys.